Rivalries in wrestling can take all shapes and forms. Some, it is just a matter of who is the best. Other feuds involve hatred. Then there are ones that, while they fit in one of those categories, go a step further. What happens when a larger-than-life figure who portrays the image of immortality meets his match? This is Rivalry Revisited, Brock vs. Taker. The most fitting place to start with the story of The Undertaker is Survivor Series 1990. It was the $1 Million Team versus the Dream Team, with the $1 Million Team having one more spot to fill. The Mystery Man hailed from Death Valley and came in at a whopping 320 pounds.
The Undertaker, the mystery partner, is now revealed! I never heard of Taker! Holy cow!
Fans were terrified, and the bell didn't even ring yet. The Undertaker gimmick took direct influence from Michael Myers, the character from the Halloween series. Slow, methodical movements, freakish strength, lack of selling, and even when he did sell, it would not be for long as the dead man would sit back up. Throughout the years, the Phenom would not just change, he would evolve. An early adjustment was adding Paul Bearer as his manager. Also, the look would be periodically altered, and eventually new sides of the character would emerge. Early in the Attitude Era, Taker would adopt a satanic gimmick and form the Ministry of Darkness. There was a lot of controversy with segments that involved this faction, but that was the goal of this time period: shock fans and keep them talking. As the Attitude Era progressed, The Undertaker needed to as well. No longer playing the immortal from Death Valley, Taker would come out on a bike in street clothes and be billed from Houston, Texas. The cemetery analogies took a backseat, and the reign of the American Badass would begin. Are you ready for a major claim? Brock Lesnar was possibly the greatest prospect in WWE history. Lesnar had a JUCO championship, a D1 national championship, D1 runner-up, was roughly 6'3", 295 pounds, and was just 24 years old at the time of his main roster debut. Let's not get distracted by my previous statement, as others might beat out Brock in some areas, but the next big thing had everything Vince McMahon coveted in a young sports entertainer. The proof was how fast the University of Minnesota alum rose to the main event scene. Once Lesnar was done beating up one of the top tag teams in the company in the Hardys, he set his sights on the King of the Ring tournament, the winner being the #1 contender for the Undisputed Championship. Brock would go on to roll through the competition, including Rob Van Dam in the finals. As the new #1 contender, Lesnar was guaranteed a title shot at SummerSlam, but before then, would make a quick detour and dismantle Hulk Hogan. To cap off a great summer, Brock would defeat the current champion The Rock in what felt like a passing of the torch match. In that moment, the fans embraced Lesnar reaching the top of the mountain. Brock had beaten two of the greatest stars of all time in Hogan and Rock. But one was far removed from his prime, and another was on the rise in Hollywood. Lesnar needed a mainstay that would add more credibility to the young star's title reign. This was a prime slot for Dead Man Inc., who earned a championship shot after defeating Chris Benoit. What The Undertaker offered Lesnar that none of his previous opponents did was a real ass kicker. Remember, the early draw to Brock was that he would physically overwhelm his challengers and essentially render them defenseless. A tall task when your opponent is around 6'9", 320. Another missing component from previous feuds was the personal beef. If you remember the lead into SummerSlam 2002, it was treated like a pure athletic competition, whether it was the training montages or the side-by-side tail-of-the-tape comparisons. The introduction of Undertaker's pregnant wife Sarah made this storyline a lot more heated. Sarah was even used in a backstage segment where Paul Heyman would lure Taker to the dressing room and Lesnar would be waiting, steel chair in hand. The scene didn't end there, as Brock would approach Sarah and show the ultimate sign of disrespect by placing his hand on her stomach and uttering the words, "Life's a bitch." A brawl would break out the following week with the American Badass getting the upper hand, and just like that, the stage was set for the Unforgiven main event. Leading up to and during the match, the theme was, Brock has the technical and athletic advantage, but the dirtier things got and the more of a fistfight it became, the more it would favor The Undertaker. The Houston, Texas native would take early control, and then Brock would respond by getting his offense in. This battle would eventually get out of hand with an unconscious ref. The bout would end in a double disqualification, but the fight would continue. The previously mentioned narrative of Taker being the better brawler rang true, as the pay-per-view would end with Lesnar going through the Unforgiven stage set. While the #1 contender did not officially go over, he did in some fans' minds, as Undertaker was the last man standing. I thought this booking made a lot of sense. You do not want to start a multi-pay-per-view feud with a specialty contest, because that sets too high of a bar early on. With a standard bout, there are rules in place. When both men are so emotionally unstable, it is easy to lose composure and break said rules. This gives a reason for the rivalry to continue. Plus, the finish gave more confidence that without disqualifications being a factor, maybe Undertaker could be the one to take out Lesnar. Similar to other championship matches, if there is not a clear winner, then the two are going to have to run it back. This time, it would be Hell in a Cell. An issue for Taker entering the demonic structure that he helped make famous was he entered with a broken hand thanks to a backstage attack with a propane tank by Lesnar. The injury would serve two purposes. One, it gave an excuse for Mark Calaway to take a break and be with his family. I mean, his wife was actually pregnant. But two, in storyline, it protected a babyface Undertaker who rarely loses clean to, well, lose clean. To give fans the belief that Taker had a chance at winning, the cast was used as a weapon in the early going. While all of us at home could see that it was a soft club, sometimes in wrestling you just need to suspend your disbelief. As the bout pressed on, it would be Brock that would start to target Undertaker's injured hand, eventually removing the cast. However, Taker would continue to show fight, even attempting a tombstone, but it would be reversed into an F5 and a victory for the champ. This was the notch on Brock's belt that legitimized him as champion. A battle in Undertaker's type of match, with blood everywhere, including Paul Heyman. This was it. Unfortunately, the fame and life on the road would begin to wear on the undisputed champion over the next year and change, leading to Lesnar's departure from WWE. It has long been rumored that at the time, Taker, who was considered the leader of the locker room, took offense to Brock leaving the company that brought him fame. Lesnar has since admitted that the amount of travel contributed to him burning out. Either way, it was a short run. Brock would try out for the Minnesota Vikings, narrowly missing the final roster, but it would be a blessing in disguise. Lesnar's true destiny was mixed martial arts, where he would defeat some notable names like Randy Couture, Frank Mir, and Shane Carwin, and is still known as one of the biggest draws in UFC heavyweight history. There would also be a small incident at UFC 121 in an attempt to drum up interest in a possible Brock Lesnar return.
Almost like you're at a loss for words here.
You want to do it?
The Undertaker during Lesnar's time away from WWE would return to the dead man gimmick, with a hint of the American Badass still present. Also, the streak which represented Taker not losing at WrestleMania kept building more steam. The incredible undefeated record was briefly mentioned throughout the dead man's career, but Mania 21 was the first bout where a match was built around it. From there, every year was a snowball effect where the streak became more and more meaningful until Taker reached the feat of 21-0 after beating Punk at Mania 29. Lesnar, who made his return the night after WrestleMania 28, was booked strong, but much more beatable compared to his 2002 introduction to WWE. So when the lights went down, The Undertaker appeared and made a non-verbal statement. Another victim of the streak had been slated for WrestleMania 30. The 30th edition of the Showcase of Immortals came from the Superdome in New Orleans. The much-anticipated showdown between longtime rivals started out as expected, where Taker put his striking on display, while Lesnar's freakish strength had its moments. Finishers and trademark moves were exchanged, and still no winner. This felt like a typical Undertaker WrestleMania match, and eventually the dead man would likely prove to be too much for the beast, right? Wrong. A callback to their No Mercy match from 2002, Taker would attempt another tombstone, but it would be countered into a third F5. Unlike every other pin attempt on The Undertaker at the granddaddy of them all, he couldn't get his shoulders up before 3. A full second went by after the referee's hand hit the mat for the final time before a collective gasp let out in the Superdome. The streak was over. A painful part of watching this classic moment back is knowing how concussed Mark Calaway was, and still he kept pushing forward. In the moment though, as someone who attended this show, I can attest to how stunned the live crowd was. My seats were probably 90 yards from the ring, yet the only voice I could hear was Paul Heyman saying, oh my god, you did it. You did it." As we know, Brock would go on to dominate John Cena like we have never seen before at SummerSlam later that year, and within the next 8 months became the mayor of Suplex City. The Undertaker, on the other hand, would regain his form with a victory against Bray Wyatt at WrestleMania 31. The final match from this feud I want to focus on is SummerSlam 2015. But what about Hell in a Cell 2015? That was a great match! Yes, but fans learned everything they needed to from WWE's biggest pay-per-view of the summer. The theme for the big clash being that The Undertaker was back because of Paul Heyman and Brock Lesnar's boasting about the ending of the streak. The beginning moments from the contest were extremely physical, from the standing exchanges to Lesnar's early MMA-esque side control. From time to time, this bout would transition between replicating mixed martial arts back to a traditional WWE match. In one of the final phases of the contest, the fight goes to the ground, and Brock cinches a Kimura. The hard cam and referee both miss a subtle tap by The Undertaker. The bell rings. During the confusion, the ref turns from the action to restart the match, and just like the weeks prior, Taker would use a low blow to get the advantage. After the below the belt shot, the dead man would lock in Hell's Gate, where a defiant Lesnar refused to tap and instead passed out. The reason this was the end of the story for me is it had become clear that The Undertaker could not defeat Brock Lesnar. In the record books, it may say that the dead man was victorious, but the optics didn't match. The Beast had taken the Attitude Era legend, a guy who in story had been buried alive and set on fire multiple times, and made him mortal. Not only did the dead man tap out, but he reeked of desperation at every turn. The repeated low blows, including the final one, told fans that even the Phenom knew he couldn't beat Lesnar. When I look back on this rivalry, I do it with two different perspectives. The first being from a storyline vantage point. Lesnar was just a guy that in the biggest matches, Undertaker couldn't beat. Brock defeated a babyface Taker a bunch of times, one being at the event that he appeared unbeatable in, and twice in a match that the Phenom helped make famous. The second perspective has to do with the luck that made WWE book this rivalry the way they did. If Undertaker was a heel in late 2002, then he wouldn't have been paired with a white-hot, new champion that was going to go over on any opponent at the time. Then a later babyface turn for Taker could pit the two against each other where the champion had less momentum. Also, if Brock never left WWE and was booked to face Taker at WrestleMania any time before he reached, let's say, 20-0, the dead man would have went over, making the rivalry much more even. Thankfully, for Lesnar, he wasn't older, because truthfully nobody had this much dominance over a babyface Undertaker in the 90s. Brock was a guy with the right look and skill set who came in, left, and came back at the perfect time. Lesnar's feud with The Undertaker alone makes the Beast a Hall of Famer. And in no way did this hamper the Phenom's legacy as one of the all-time greats. There was almost a beautiful, bittersweet chapter in the way he went down fighting. This is Rivalry Revisited, Brock vs. Taker. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more content like this, hit the subscribe button.